She thought divorce was the end, until life whispered, "Begin again." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new stories about love, loss, and the power of starting over. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more emotional journeys like this one. Your support means the world to us. And while you are here, tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a moment that felt like the end, only to discover it was actually a new beginning? We would love to hear your story. Now, let us return to our main character, a woman who once believed her life was perfect, until the day everything quietly fell apart. For years, she lived the image of the American dream, a charming suburban home with white shutters, a husband who looked loving across dinner tables, and a life that appeared neatly in place. On the outside, it was peaceful. Inside, it was silent, too silent. The laughter that used to fill the kitchen had turned into polite conversations, and the warmth of connection had faded into routine. Each morning, she stared into the mirror, searching for the woman she used to be. Her smile looked practiced, her eyes distant. She told herself this was how marriage worked: predictable, stable, and sometimes dull. But deep down, she knew the truth. Love had quietly disappeared, leaving only the performance of togetherness. When the divorce papers arrived, they came without thunder, without tears. Just a thin envelope, a few lines of text, and her name separated from his by a legal phrase that made everything final. She read it twice, expecting to feel something: anger, sadness, relief. But instead, there was only stillness. It was as if her life had ended, not with a crash, but with a whisper. The weeks that followed were heavy, days blended together, filled with endless small tasks that meant nothing. The coffee tasted bitter, the bed felt too large, and every sound in the house echoed like a reminder of absence. Friends tried to help. They told her she was free now, that she could do whatever she wanted. But freedom felt like standing in the middle of a vast, empty field with no idea which way to walk. At night, when the world went quiet, her thoughts grew loud. She replayed every moment that had led her here, every conversation that could have gone differently. She wondered if she had made a mistake, or if this emptiness was the price of honesty. She asked herself questions she could not answer. Who am I without him? What do I want from life now? What if this is all there is? And then one morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, soft and golden. She sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time she did not cry. She simply breathed. The world outside her window looked exactly the same, yet something inside her had shifted. The pain had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. Beneath the ache, there was something new, a quiet, steady pulse. Hope. She realized that maybe this ending was not punishment. Maybe it was permission to rediscover the woman she had once been before life asked her to shrink. She could stay and drown in memories, or she could take a step into the unknown. That afternoon, she opened a small suitcase and began to pack. A few clothes, a notebook, a single book she loved. She did not make a plan. She did not tell anyone. She simply walked out the door and closed it behind her. The air outside felt different, lighter, freer, alive. For the first time in years, she was not moving for anyone else. Every step she took felt uncertain but real. She did not yet know where this road would lead, only that she had finally started walking. What she could not yet see was that this journey, born from heartbreak, would become the most important journey of her life, the one that would lead her not to another person, but back to herself. When she boarded the plane, she was not chasing adventure. She was running toward silence, toward a kind of peace she could not yet name. The ticket said Rome, but what she was really searching for was herself. As the aircraft lifted into the clouds, she pressed her forehead to the window and watched the shrinking city below. Everything she had known, her marriage, her routine, her carefully constructed identity, became smaller and smaller until it was just a cluster of distant lights fading into the horizon. The moment she arrived in Italy, the air felt different. The streets were alive with movement, voices overlapping in melody, the aroma of roasted coffee beans drifting from tiny cafes. For the first time in a long time, she had nowhere to be and no one waiting. She could walk without purpose, stop without explanation, breathe without guilt. The freedom felt foreign, almost frightening, like learning how to walk again. On her first morning in Rome, she sat at a small cafe on a cobblestone street. The waiter brought her a cappuccino topped with delicate foam, and beside it, a plate of warm brioche filled with cream. She took one bite and closed her eyes. The flavor was rich, sweet, unapologetically indulgent. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that she allowed herself to enjoy something without judgment. That simple act became her new ritual. She spent her days exploring hidden corners of the city, tasting, observing, listening. Each meal was a lesson. Pasta tossed with olive oil and garlic taught her that simplicity can be divine. Fresh bread shared with strangers reminded her that connection can exist without words. She began to smile again, not because she was supposed to, but because she wanted to. In the evenings, she wandered through narrow alleys illuminated by the glow of street lamps. She watched couples laugh, musicians play, and children chase pigeons across piazzas. There were moments when loneliness brushed against her, but it no longer felt like an enemy. Instead, it felt like a companion guiding her to rediscover who she was beneath the labels of wife, friend, and daughter. One night, sitting on the Spanish steps, she wrote in her journal, the pages filled with words that came from somewhere deep inside thoughts she had silenced for too long. She wrote about the taste of freedom, the beauty of imperfection, the art of slowing down. Her handwriting was uneven, her sentences raw, but for the first time they were honest. Days turned into weeks. She took an Italian language class, met travelers who carried stories from all over the world, and learned to say yes to small invitations, an afternoon walk, a shared meal, a spontaneous conversation. Each experience stitched together a new version of herself. She was still healing, but she was also expanding. One Sunday, she joined a local family for dinner after meeting them at a market. The table overflowed with pasta, wine, and laughter. She barely understood the language, yet she felt more at home than she had in years. The grandmother placed a hand over hers and said slowly, "Mangia, cara." Eat, my dear. It was a simple phrase, but in that moment it felt like a blessing. As she walked back to her apartment that night, the city hummed around her, alive and unafraid. She realized that the world did not expect her to be anyone other than who she was right now, a woman learning to live again. Italy had not erased her past. It had not filled the empty spaces left by her marriage, but it had given her something far more valuable, the permission to savor life one small, imperfect moment at a time. For the first time, she did not feel lost. She felt open. The world was wide, and for the first time, she wanted to see it all. Her journey was only beginning, and somewhere deep within, she felt that the next step would take her even farther from comfort to challenge, from self-indulgence to self-discovery. Because sometimes, the path to healing does not begin with answers. It begins with a single bite of something beautiful and the courage to taste life again. After months in Italy, she had rediscovered pleasure, the taste of food, the beauty of language, the rhythm of slow living. But even as she laughed and shared meals, a quiet part of her remained unsettled. Joy had returned to her life, yet peace had not. She realized that her heart was still noisy, filled with thoughts that refused to rest. That was when she decided to travel east, to a place where silence was not empty, but sacred. Her next destination was India. When she stepped off the plane in Delhi, the world seemed to explode around her: colors, sounds, scents, movement. Streets pulsed with life. The heat pressed against her skin. She felt both overwhelmed and alive. A driver took her to an ashram located on the outskirts of the city, where she planned to spend several weeks in meditation and service. Her first morning there was harder than she expected. The ashram woke before sunrise. Bells rang in the distance as devotees gathered for prayer. She sat cross-legged on the floor, trying to still her mind. But her thoughts swirled endlessly: memories of her past life, worries about her future, doubts about what she was even doing there. Her body ached from sitting still, and her mind screamed for distraction. Days passed slowly. Every hour was filled with repetition: silence, meditation, chores, reflection. She washed floors, cleaned dishes, and worked in the gardens under the warm Indian Sunday. At first, she resisted it. She missed her freedom, her cappuccinos, the liveliness of Rome. But gradually something began to shift. There was a strange comfort in doing small tasks with intention. One afternoon, as she swept the temple courtyard, a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the air. For a moment, time seemed to pause. She realized she was not thinking about her past, not analyzing, not trying to fix anything. She was simply there, breathing, present, alive. It was such a simple moment, yet it felt profound. At night, she lay on her thin mattress, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside. The silence that once terrified her had become a companion. It was no longer emptiness, it was space. Space for forgiveness, space for new beginnings. She began to understand that peace is not found by escaping noise, but by learning to sit within it without losing yourself. During her final week at the ashram, she spoke with a teacher who had lived there for decades. The woman looked at her with kind eyes and said, "You keep searching for peace like it is somewhere far away. But peace is not a place. It is the way you breathe, the way you see, the way you accept." Those words stayed with her. She realized that for years she had lived in constant motion, chasing love, chasing approval, chasing happiness. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to stop running. In her journal she wrote, "Maybe peace is not something to find. Maybe it is something to remember." When her time at the ashram ended, she did not feel like a new person. She still had doubts, fears, and memories that hurt. But she also carried something she had never had before, a stillness that lived quietly beneath the noise. As she packed her small suitcase once more, she felt gratitude instead of sadness. She looked around at the dusty paths, the prayer flags fluttering in the wind, the faces of people who had shared this journey with her. This place had not erased her pain. It had simply taught her how to hold it without breaking. When she left India, she carried no souvenirs, only lessons. She knew that her journey was not complete. There was one more place calling to her, a final chapter she had not yet written. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that this next step would not just be about healing. It would be about opening her heart again to love, to life, and to the possibility that sometimes, after losing everything, we are finally ready to begin again. When she arrived in Bali, the air felt different from anywhere she had been before. It carried the scent of the ocean, mixed with frangipani flowers and warm rain. The island was both wild and gentle, full of contradictions that somehow made perfect sense. She came here not to escape, but to live, to take all that she had learned in Italy and India, and discover what it meant to feel whole again. Her first days passed quietly. She rented a small cottage surrounded by rice fields that stretched endlessly under the golden light of sunset. Each morning, the sound of roosters woke her, and she would walk barefoot through the damp grass, breathing in the scent of earth after rain. Life moved slowly here. Nobody rushed. The rhythm of the island seemed to beat in time with her own heart. One afternoon, while exploring a local market, she met an elderly healer who spoke softly and smiled often. He seemed to see right through her, past her polite expressions and calm surface. After a long pause, he said, "You have been searching the world for balance. But balance is not found by standing still. It is found by learning to move with life." His words sank deep into her. She had spent so long trying to control her path, afraid of losing her sense of peace, that she had forgotten what it meant to simply flow. Over the following weeks, she began to open herself to new experiences again. She joined yoga sessions at sunrise, rode her bike along narrow village roads, and shared meals with the people she met. Their kindness was effortless, not built on expectations or demands. It reminded her that connection does not always come from history or promises, it comes from presence. One evening, she was invited to a small beach gathering. The sun was melting into the horizon, turning the sky shades of gold and violet. Someone played a guitar, and laughter drifted into the warm night air. That was when she met him, a man whose voice carried calmness, whose eyes held both curiosity and understanding. They talked for hours, not about the past or the future, but about everything in between, the simple things that made life beautiful. She had promised herself she would not fall again. Love had once broken her open, and she feared the idea of losing her hard-earned peace. But something about this man felt different. He did not try to fix her. He did not ask her to be anyone other than who she was. He listened. He stayed present. And slowly, without realizing it, she began to trust again. Their days unfolded in a rhythm as natural as breathing. They cooked together, rode scooters through palm-lined roads, and sat silently watching waves crash against the shore. There were no grand declarations, no promises of forever, only the quiet certainty of two people meeting at the right time, in the right place, with open hearts. Still, one evening as she watched the tide roll in, fear crept back in. What if love meant losing herself again? What if happiness was temporary? She shared these thoughts with him, expecting the usual reassurance. But instead, he smiled and said, "Maybe love is not about holding on or letting go. Maybe it is about learning how to stay open no matter what comes." Those words stayed with her. She realized that the woman who once believed divorce was the end had transformed. Italy had taught her to taste life again. India had taught her to find peace in silence. And Bali was teaching her the most profound lesson of all, to love without fear. As the days turned into weeks, she no longer measured time by pain or progress. She simply lived. She cooked, she laughed, she wrote, she loved. The scars of her past had not disappeared, but they no longer defined her. They had become part of her story, proof that she had lived deeply and learned to rise again. One morning, She stood by the ocean, watching the waves crash and retreat. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the scent of salt and sunlight. She smiled not because she had found a perfect ending, but because she finally understood something simple yet powerful. The end of one story had been the beginning of another, and in that moment, as the sea whispered softly around her, she knew that life had not just whispered, "Begin again." It had sung it, over and over, until she finally listened. Time passed gently in Bali. Days drifted into one another like waves meeting the shore. She had built a life that was simple yet full of life, defined not by plans or expectations, but by presence. The mornings began with the song of birds outside her window and the smell of coffee brewing slowly on the stove. The evenings ended with the soft hum of cicadas and the steady rhythm of her breath. For the first time in years, she felt grounded, not in a place or a person, but in herself. Yet, peace has its own kind of challenge. It asks a person to stay awake, to not hide behind comfort. One evening, as she and the man she had met on the beach sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, he asked her a question that stayed with her long after the night ended. "When you go home," he said gently, "what will you take with you?" At first, she did not know how to answer. Home. The word still felt heavy, filled with the ghosts of her old life, the arguments, the silence, the expectations. But over the following days, she thought about it often. What was home now? Was it a place? Or was it a state of being she carried within her? As her time on the island came to an end, she began to pack her few belongings. The cottage that once felt foreign now felt sacred. Every corner held a memory. The laughter of friends over dinner, the quiet mornings of reflection, the nights filled with stories and starlight. She realized she had come to Bali searching for peace, but she would be leaving with something much deeper, a sense of wholeness. Before she left, she visited the old healer once more. He smiled when he saw her and said, "You look lighter now." She laughed softly and replied, "Maybe because I finally stopped carrying everything that was never mine to hold." The healer nodded. "Then you have learned the final lesson," he said. "When the heart learns to let go, it finally finds its way home." The morning she departed, the island was quiet. The roads glistened from a night of rain. She rode to the airport with the wind on her face, and for the first time, she did not feel the familiar ache of leaving something behind. She was not escaping anymore. She was simply moving forward. On the flight, she opened her journal, the same one she had carried since the day she left her old life. Its pages were filled with reflections, questions, and small moments that had shaped her journey. Somewhere between the lines about Italy's laughter and India's silence, she saw the pattern clearly. Every place had given her a piece of herself back. When the plane landed, she stepped into the crisp air of her home country. Everything looked the same. People rushing, cars honking, life moving fast, but she was not the same woman who had left months ago. She walked slowly, calmly, carrying with her the lessons of the world. In the following weeks, she rebuilt her life from the ground up. She found a small apartment filled with sunlight. She cooked her own meals, worked from her kitchen table, and surrounded herself with things that felt meaningful. She reconnected with old friends, but she no longer felt the need to explain her story. She had lived it, learned from it, and let it go. One morning, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, she realized she was smiling again. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally free to feel joy without fear, to love without losing herself, and to wake each day with gratitude instead of regret. She had once thought divorce was the end, but now she understood it had been the invitation she needed to begin again. Her journey had taken her across continents, through heartbreak and healing, through silence and laughter. But in the end, she discovered that the greatest journey was not about distance. It was about coming home to herself. The first few months after returning home felt like walking through familiar streets with new eyes. The city had not changed, but she had. The noise, the rush, the endless rhythm of daily life no longer overwhelmed her. She had learned how to pause, how to breathe, how to find stillness even when the world refused to stop. She built new routines that reflected the person she had become. Each morning began with quiet meditation, a habit she had carried from the ashram in India. She cooked her breakfast slowly, savoring every flavor just as she had learned in Italy. And every evening, she would light a small candle and write in her journal, a practice born from her time in Bali. These small rituals became anchors, reminders that peace and purpose were not distant destinations but choices made every single day. One afternoon, as she walked through a park filled with children playing and dogs chasing after sticks, She ran into a friend she had not seen since before the divorce. The friend looked surprised. "You seem different," she said. "Happier, lighter." She smiled and answered honestly, "I finally stopped trying to be who I thought I was supposed to be." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her entire journey. She no longer measured her worth by her relationship status, her success, or anyone's approval. She had learned that joy did not depend on perfection. It came from authenticity, from being fully present in the life she had, not the one she used to dream about. Still, there were moments when loneliness visited her again. It arrived quietly. In the evenings when the city lights flickered outside her window, or during long walks when the world seemed too big. But instead of running from it, she welcomed it. Loneliness, she realized, was not an enemy. It was a teacher. It reminded her of her capacity to feel deeply, to care, to connect. One day, she received a message from the man she had met in Bali. He wrote simply, "I hope you are smiling wherever you are." She read it twice, feeling a gentle warmth spread through her. Their story had not ended in forever, but that was all right. What they had shared had been real, honest, and enough. It had taught her that love did not need to be permanent to be meaningful. With time, she began to open her heart again, not necessarily to romance, but to the world. She volunteered at a local community center, helping women who were also rebuilding their lives after loss. Listening to their stories, she recognized parts of herself in each of them: the fear, the confusion, the quiet strength hidden beneath it all. She did not offer advice. She simply listened, held space, and reminded them that starting over is not a failure. It is courage in motion. As the seasons changed, she found herself living more fully than ever before. She traveled to nearby towns, spent weekends by the ocean, and learned to paint just for the joy of creating. She no longer chased happiness as if it were a finish line. She found it in moments in laughter, in stillness, in the way sunlight touched her face through the window each morning. One evening, sitting on her balcony as the city lights shimmered below, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who once believed divorce was the end had transformed into someone unafraid of uncertainty. She had fallen apart and rebuilt herself piece by piece, not into the person she used to be, but into the woman she was always meant to become. She closed her journal for the night and whispered softly to herself, "Thank you." Not to anyone else, but to life for breaking her open, for forcing her to begin again, and for teaching her that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. Her story was not about heartbreak anymore, it was about awakening. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew that this was not the end. It was simply another beginning, waiting quietly for her to step forward. As time moved forward, her life began to settle into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. It was not built on grand adventures or dramatic turns anymore, but on the quiet satisfaction of simply being alive. She had returned to her home city months ago, yet in many ways, she still felt like a traveler, someone constantly discovering the beauty hidden within the familiar. Each morning began the same way. She would open her window, breathe in the cool air, and whisper a small thank you to the day. Gratitude had become her compass. It guided her through the small details: coffee brewing, sunlight spilling across her kitchen counter, the hum of the world waking up outside. These things were not background noise anymore. They were proof that life could still be beautiful, even after it had been broken. She began teaching part-time at a local community center, leading mindfulness and journaling workshops for people going through change. The sessions were simple. She taught them how to breathe with intention, how to sit with uncomfortable emotions, and how to write honestly without fear of judgment. Most of all, she reminded them that healing was not a straight path. Some days were about progress, others were simply about surviving. Both were important. During one of her workshops, a young woman asked her, "When did you stop feeling angry?" The question hung in the air for a moment. She thought carefully before answering. "When I stopped fighting the past," she said softly. "I realized that anger is like holding on to a burning coal. You believe it will protect you, but it only keeps hurting you." The room fell silent, and in that silence, she could feel understanding settling like dust after a storm. Outside of work, she continued exploring small joys. She spent weekends visiting art galleries, walking through botanical gardens, and cooking new recipes inspired by her travels. She reconnected with her sister, with whom she had lost touch during the difficult years of her marriage. Their conversations were filled with laughter and forgiveness. It felt like rediscovering family again, not out of obligation, but out of love. There were still moments of doubt, brief flashes when old memories returned uninvited. But instead of pushing them away, she met them with kindness. "It is all right," she would tell herself. "You are allowed to remember without going back." This practice of self-compassion became her quiet strength. It allowed her to live without pretending that pain had never existed. One crisp autumn afternoon, she took a long walk by the river. The leaves had turned golden, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Watching the water flow steadily beneath the bridge, she realized something profound. Healing had not erased her scars. It had transformed them into reminders of resilience. She had survived what once felt impossible, and that knowledge gave her an unshakable calm. Later that evening, she met a few friends for dinner. They laughed, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. Someone asked her if she ever thought about falling in love again. She smiled, not in hesitation but in peace. "If love comes," she said, "I will welcome it, but I am not waiting for it to make me whole. I already am." When she returned home that night, she lit a candle and wrote her final thought of the day. Maybe the secret to happiness is not in chasing more, but in embracing enough. The flame flickered softly as she closed her journal. As she lay in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against the window, she felt a deep contentment settle within her. She did not know what the next chapter of her life would bring, and for the first time, that uncertainty felt beautiful. She had learned that living fully did not mean having everything figured out. It meant showing up each day with an open heart, ready to experience life as it came, messy, imperfect, unpredictable, and real. And in that moment, she understood the quiet truth she had spent years searching for. Peace was not a destination. It was the way she lived, one honest breath at a time. Winter came quietly that year. The city was wrapped in silver light, and the air carried the kind of stillness that invited reflection. She found herself spending more evenings indoors, reading, painting, and journaling by the soft glow of candles. Life was no longer about escaping pain or chasing happiness. It had become about listening. Listening to her thoughts, her breath, her instincts, and the gentle rhythm of the world around her. One evening, as snow fell softly outside her window, she sat by the fire with a cup of tea and reread old journal entries from her travels. The pages smelled faintly of salt and incense, traces of places that had shaped her. She smiled at the words written by a younger, braver version of herself, the woman who had dared to leave everything behind in search of meaning. That woman had faced fear, loneliness, and uncertainty, but she had also found strength, laughter, and grace. As she turned the page, one line caught her attention. It was something she had written in Bali. "The universe always answers, but only when you are quiet enough to listen." She paused, realizing how true those words still felt. For so long, she had filled her life with noises, plans, goals, relationships, expectations. Now, in the silence she once feared, she felt deeply connected to life itself. One morning, she received an email from a small publishing company. They had come across her writing through the Mindfulness Community Center and wanted to feature one of her essays in an anthology about transformation. The request surprised her. She had never seen herself as a writer, only as a woman trying to make sense of her story. Yet now, that very story was resonating with others. The editor wrote, "Your words capture the beauty of rediscovery. They remind readers that healing is not about forgetting, but about learning to begin again." She read the message twice, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. She realized that sharing her story was not about fame or recognition. It was about connection, about reaching the hearts of others who were standing at the edge of their own new beginnings. Over the next few weeks, she worked on polishing her essay. Each word felt like a thread connecting her past to her present. She wrote not just about the places she had visited, but about the emotions that had guided her journey: fear, hope, heartbreak, and joy. It was not a story of perfection, but of evolution. When the book was finally published, she received a copy in the mail. The cover was simple soft blue with a single white feather drifting across it. Inside, her name appeared among many others, all voices woven together by the shared experience of change. Holding the book in her hands, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she understood that her journey had never been just about finding herself. It had been about becoming part of something larger, about reminding others that it was never too late to start over. A few weeks later, she was invited to speak at a small local event about personal growth. Standing on the stage, looking out at the faces of strangers, she felt a calm confidence she had never known before. She began her talk with a simple sentence: "There was a time when I thought divorce was the end of my story, but life had other plans." The room was silent, every ear tuned to her voice. As she spoke, she could see tears, smiles, and quiet nods in the audience. People were connecting not with her success, but with her truth, with the raw, imperfect journey that had brought her here. When she finished, the room filled with applause. Yet what moved her most was not the sound of clapping hands, it was the sense of shared humanity that filled the space. That night, walking home beneath a sky full of stars, she felt an overwhelming peace. The universe had indeed whispered back. Not through signs or miracles, but through the simple, steady rhythm of a life lived authentically. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you," not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood that it did not have to be. The world was not something to be conquered or escaped. It was something to be felt, one moment at a time. And in that understanding, she realized she was finally, beautifully, home. Spring arrived slowly, almost shyly, painting the city with soft colors and the scent of new life. Trees bloomed again, and the air carried a warmth that felt like renewal. She often walked through the park near her apartment, the same park where she had once confessed to a friend that she was learning how to live again. This time, she no longer walked searching for answers. She walked simply to feel alive, to listen to the laughter of children, the song of birds, and the steady rhythm of her own footsteps. Life had settled into something calm yet deeply fulfilling. Her workshops continued to grow, and her essay had touched readers far beyond what she ever imagined. Letters began to arrive, strangers, sharing their own stories of loss, love, and rediscovery. Some wrote that her words had given them courage to leave unhappy marriages. Others said they had found hope in knowing they were not alone. She read every message with gratitude and humility, realizing that the story that once broke her had now become a source of healing for others. One afternoon, after leading a mindfulness session, she decided to visit her favorite cafe, a small, sunlit place on the corner with wooden tables and the smell of fresh bread. As she waited for her tea, she noticed a man sitting by the window, sketching in a notebook. He looked up, caught her gaze, and smiled. It was a quiet, unhurried smile, the kind that asked nothing in return. She smiled back, not with expectation, but with simple warmth. They began talking about art, travel, and the strange beauty of second chances. There was no spark of instant passion, no cinematic moment of destiny, just two people meeting at the right time, both aware of the stories they carried, both at peace with where they were. Before leaving, he said, "Maybe we could meet again. No plans, no pressure, just two people sharing a cup of tea." She agreed. Not because she needed love, but because she was finally open to it. In the weeks that followed, they met again and again, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for quiet walks. Their connection grew naturally, without the rush or fear that once defined her relationships. For the first time, she experienced love as something gentle, not consuming. It did not take away her independence or demand that she change. It simply added light to a life that already felt whole. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood on her balcony with a cup of tea in hand, watching the world turn gold. The city buzzed softly beneath her, alive and endless. She thought back to everything that had brought her here, the heartbreak, the courage, the journey across continents, and the countless small moments that had rebuilt her from within. She whispered to herself, "You thought divorce was the end. But it was the door that opened everything." She finally understood that beginnings rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they come disguised as endings, heartbreaks, or losses. But beneath the pain, life is always whispering, inviting us to grow, to change, to begin again. That night, she opened her journal for the last entry of that chapter. Her handwriting was steady, her words simple. "I have learned that peace is not found in escaping the world, but in embracing it. I have learned that love does not save you, it mirrors the love you already found within yourself. And I have learned that the end of one story is just the quiet beginning of another." She closed the book, placed it gently on her nightstand, and looked out at the city lights, shimmering like stars below. For the first time in her life, she did not wonder what came next. She simply smiled, knowing that whatever waited beyond this moment, she was ready. Because she had already begun again, and this time, she was home within herself.